Hello and welcome back to the third episode of the Leftists Be Like podcast. I'm your host, Bryson Morris. I'm Donut Morris on all my socials, and today's episode is going to be about Palestine, Israel, Palestine, and Gaza. This is going to probably be a pretty base level introduction to Palestine, kind of a Palestine 101, more geared at progressives or baby leftists or people that are just not as introduced to the topic as they should be at this point, or you're just not hearing it on the news because, right after October 7th and the year or so after that, Gaza and Israel were in the news constantly, with the election that happened in 2024 in the news everywhere. And with our midterms, Israel's been in the news for a little bit, but I have seen a pretty sharp decrease in the amount of coverage I've seen over Israel, Palestine, and Gaza. We definitely focused on bad things Israel's doing or the Israeli government being bad, but I definitely don't see nearly what I was seeing a year or so ago on the humanity of Palestinians and Gazans and what their life looks like, especially after the ceasefire in Gaza. So I just want to give you some information, some base level stuff that is pretty easy to find if you want to go out there and look for it, but I can synthesize a lot of it for you. And just to let you know, there is no ceasefire in Gaza. The genocide is still happening. The Gazan people still need our help. The Palestinians still need our help. And not only am I going to be talking about Gaza, I also want to talk about the West Bank, which is a part that a lot of people who don't pay super heavy attention to the news and the actual research that you have to go and do for yourself because mainstream American media is not going to report it, is the West Bank. A lot of people don't know what's happening in the West Bank. They don't know the history of the West Bank, and it's also very important, and the conditions there are also very bad, and people are suffering. It's just the genocide is most actively taking place in Gaza currently. What I wanted to talk about first was the ceasefire not being a real thing. Since October 2025, when the ceasefire was technically signed, they estimate that around one child per day has been murdered every single day on average since that ceasefire happened. And this is from bombings, this is direct soldier fire, this is famine, lack of water, lack of medicine, lack of infrastructure. They're still bombing Gaza almost every single day, if not multiple times a day. They're still shooting Gazans. They still have prisoners. They are being genocided actively. It's just basically back to the point that it was before the quote-unquote war started after October 7th. Except this time, they have no infrastructure. The Gazan people, they have no buildings. They have no infrastructure. They have no structures. I believe it was estimated that somewhere between 80 to 90% of all buildings and structures in Gaza have been severely damaged by the Israelis. And this most recent report by the United Nations actually says that 94% of people in Gaza don't have proper shelter, because even the ones who do have proper shelter are basically in fancy tents. Like, those are the people having the best shelter in Gaza, because almost every single building has been bombed to oblivion, and the ones that haven't been blown to bits are blown up without a roof or without a wall or running water or electricity, obviously. They are destroyed buildings, but maybe still kind of standing. So only 6% of people actually have their needs met as far as shelter in Gaza. And then we have 1.4 million people in Gaza who are food insecure, and that's at least 67% of the entire Gaza population. And that doesn't even mention water, running water. They obviously don't have that. They don't have clean water for the most part. The only way that water is really getting in is from water trucks, and then they have to wait in line for those trucks, and they often have to walk or bike or carry a wagon, whatever they have to do to get that water, maybe miles or so. Through the rubble and all that, because they don't have real roads or anything. And a lot of people are sick, and the medicine costs money. Everything in Gaza right now is expensive. Everything is more expensive than you would ever think at all, let alone in a small, tiny little area that is being actively genocided. These people can't afford the medicines they need. They can't afford the food. They can't afford the water. And obviously, there's no way to make money in Gaza, really, because they are actively being genocided. What jobs are you going to have whenever, your place of work is blown up the next day? So the people in Gaza really are still suffering every single day to an extreme degree, and a degree you probably aren't hearing about in the media, which is telling in itself. But then there are also people like Ben-Gvir, who is a foreign, I believe, defense minister or the interior defense minister for Israel. So he's one of the highest positions in the Israeli government. He actually said on a podcast that he advocates killing 30 to 40 Gazan people every single night until basically they're all gone, I guess. And, people are saying, oh, he doesn't represent the Israeli government, whatever. When you hear people say that it's not a genocide in Gaza, I want you to go and look up some of these quotes from actual Israeli politicians like Ben-Gvir. Ben-Gvir openly and honestly talks about, basically without necessarily saying the word genocide all the time, but straight up just advocating for the genocide of Palestinians in public. This isn't a secret. They are doing a genocide. They have been doing a genocide. They've always intended to do a genocide. They want to wipe the Gazan people off the map. I think, maybe it would be preferable for them to just get rid of them and toss them out somewhere that they could, but obviously the rest of the region is not going to allow that to happen, and they would also prefer to just slaughter every single one of them. But I think based off of past genocidal projects that we've seen, they've probably realized, hey, if we do that, they're going to shut our shit down. And obviously we haven't shut their shit down yet, so their strategy is working. The strategy really here being, obviously they're bombing them, obviously they're shooting them, but a lot of the real systemic damage they're doing is the constant starvation, the constant lack of resources, water, and shelter. Basically, Israel saying, if we don't shoot them, if we don't kill them, the elements will kill them. And that is their goal, is to wipe them off the map. Basically to have living space, to have real estate. There are some guys back in the 30s and 40s in Germany that would have called that Lebensraum. But, I will probably get deleted off of all social medias if I actually say the words I want to say about the IDF, but you get my illusion there. And so Gaza really is that bad, and however bad you think it is, it's probably worse. And so I would really encourage all of you just to go out there on the internet and just look up pictures, look up videos, look up news articles, and you can basically find them anywhere. I mean, if you go for a simple Google search, you'll find thousands of articles and hundreds of thousands of pictures and videos, if you really want to, of just the destruction in Gaza, but not only the destruction, but the people. That's an important thing that I think gets lost in a lot of this with the Palestine conflict specifically is, yes, obviously we know that it's bad to kill people and we know it's bad to kill innocent people. But I think a lot of times when we just hear numbers, like the death count in Gaza now is somewhere between 75,000 and 80,000. And if you haven't heard before, that number is the most conservative number possible. They actually have to have a body, a person, they have to be identified and then linked to actually some violence from the Israelis that killed them. So that 75,000 number is way below what it actually is. And there are also at least 10,000 people completely missing who are almost 100% certainty they're under the rubble dead. So the actual dead number by Israel, the number of people that Israel has killed, is well in the hundreds of thousands, if not 200,000 plus. But, we're not going to actually have those official perfect numbers or whatever until decades after it's already happened. And who knows if the Palestinian people still exist by then. But I think when we hear those numbers, like 100,000 or whatever, I think it's easy for our brains to detach the humanity from that. And I just want you to go and look at pictures of the people in Palestine. These people are innocent. There are so many children. It's something like 36 to 50%, something like that, of the people killed in Gaza are women or children. And even that male combatant number that they count is often like 15 and 16-year-old boys. Like, these are children. Even if they are fighting, they're fighting back against an overwhelming belligerent military force that is trying to wipe them off the face of the planet. So a 15-year-old boy who picks up a gun to fight against that, I don't see how you could blame them, and I don't really see how you could, I guess you could call them a combatant, but, they're still a kid, and they're doing what they have to do. And yeah, it really is undeniable at this point. It was undeniable years ago at this point. But people still do deny it, and I want you guys out there who are listening to this to be armed with the knowledge and to be able to educate yourself and to go out there and look. Some good sources, Amnesty International, the United Nations has a lot of stuff on it. Obviously, the United Nations is not a great source for everything because they're an imperial force. But when it comes to this conflict specifically, I think United Nations can be a very telling source because of all of the damning evidence you can find from the United Nations against Israel, and then sit back and think about how the United Nations is basically built to protect places like Israel. So what the United Nations is reporting has to be the bare minimum of what is actually going on. Everything has to be worse than what the United Nations is saying, and what the United Nations is saying is absolutely horrifying. So I think that's really important to go look at. And obviously, if you don't know, there are 30, 40, 50, every single United Nations, Human Rights Watch, all these organizations all say it's a genocide, and they've been saying it's a genocide for years now. I did some research into this a while ago, and I believe the first signs you start seeing of people calling it a genocide, like giant groups like that calling it a genocide, is somewhere around early 2024, and we are into the late 2026s now, and the genocide has not stopped, and at many points in between now and then it's actually increased. So obviously it's a genocide. It's not even something that we should really be discussing at this point, but people do still try their best to fight against that. But if you just go and look, it is absolutely impossible to deny. And the next thing I wanted to talk about was the West Bank. So a lot of you may know about Gaza and the conditions in Gaza, and obviously October 7th happened. Hamas is in Gaza. So they justify it loosely by saying they have to defeat Hamas. So they just blow everything to smithereens. It's a war zone. They've just exploded the entire place and turned it into a concentration camp with 2 million people. But a lot of people don't know what is happening in the West Bank. So the West Bank is actually on the east side of Palestine, east side of what is now Israel, I guess, occupied Palestine. And it is a much larger area, and it was officially conquered and taken over by Israel after the results of the 1967 war. They took it back from Jordan, who had kind of control over it. But so what they did there was, since 1967 and onward, they have slowly turned the West Bank into a collection of enclaves where they're split apart from each other, and they actually don't have any authority. They don't have any way to police themselves often. They don't have any real government. They don't have much real infrastructure, and they're separated from the rest of the West Bank. And this is what we traditionally like to call an apartheid structure. And so Gaza was also under an apartheid structure, but Gaza was a little bit more independent in some ways, especially because it had those resistance groups, so it could kind of, in some ways, fend for itself or fight for itself. And obviously the situation has changed since October 7th. But the West Bank has been this way for a long time, and it is still operating this way. We don't see those constant bombs and things like that in the West Bank, but we do see businesses segregated. We see public life segregated. We see everything segregated, and then they're split apart, much like the Bantustans in South Africa back in the 80s and such. If you are familiar with South Africa, the West Bank, it's very easy and simple if you just want to think of the West Bank as basically the Palestinian South Africa. That's essentially how it operates there. I mean, people don't even understand or know and have never heard of it, but there are interesting and great websites. Like, go to visualizingpalestine.org. That they're great. They have a map and a bunch of different resources you can look at of how the West Bank is split up. But basically, the West Bank has separate roads, separate businesses, separate everything for Palestinians and Israelis. So they have and on those Palestinian roads, by the way, it's not like they're free roads or anything. They have roads that are specifically for Palestinians that are segregated from others that are also controlled by the IDF and the Israeli military. So the Israeli military controls movement, they control speech, they control everything about the West Bank and the movement of Palestinians and the lives of Palestinians over there. But on top of that, now, especially in recent times, the settler expansion you'll hear about a lot. And what's happening here is basically settlers from Israel and all across the planet who are Jews. They have to be Jews, and I'll explain that later. These settlers are coming into the West Bank, and sometimes they beat them. They throw rocks at the Palestinian people, the Palestinian people's homes that they've been living in for generations, for thousands of years, basically, at this point. And what the settlers do is they come over, they harass these people who are doing nothing wrong. They sometimes kill them, they sometimes beat them, they sometimes burn their houses down, they sometimes blow up their houses, shoot at their houses, kill their crops, kill their livestock, poison their water, steal their water, shut off their water flows, things like this. Basically anything that they can do to terrorize these people. And generally speaking, how it goes is settler shows up, terrorize the people living there, try and force them to leave. If they don't leave, they'll set up an outpost. Then when they set up that outpost, they get closer and closer and closer and encroach on the Palestinian people's territory to where if the Palestinians won't leave, hopefully through this harassment, beating them, whatever they have to do, they can get the Palestinians to retaliate. When the Palestinians retaliate, then the IDF comes and forcibly pushes them out with guns and tanks and trucks and soldiers. And if they resist, obviously they're arrested or killed. But let's say the Palestinians don't retaliate, the IDF will still come and kick these people out. They'll tell them they have some new agreement or some new land marking or whatever, that your property is no longer your property and it is the settlers' property. So essentially what they're doing here is ethnic cleansing with extra steps. So harass, kick them out, and then move in. And so through this, for decades now, they've just been shrinking the West Bank. So if you look at the West Bank on a map, it's actually going to look a lot bigger than it actually is because, like I said, it's split up into these enclaves, but even within those enclaves, they're constantly shrinking. And so what they're doing here is ethnic cleansing. They're trying to push all the Palestinians out. They're trying to remove any sort of organizing or any sort of power that they have because they're trying to expand their state. And not only are they trying to expand their state, they're trying to get people from across the world who are Jews to come and expand as well, which boasts their population. And then through this process, it also weakens the power that Palestinians could have possibly had if they ever had any, which they haven't for a very long time. But they strengthen themselves and they weaken the Palestinians. This is all happening at the exact same time as the genocide in Gaza is happening. And most recently, these Israeli settler attacks have actually ramped up very heavily in the past couple months. And it's just more of this violence that we're seeing all the time. There was a video that you can go look up. It was a month or so ago at this point, sometime in July or June maybe. And basically, a group of Israeli settlers come up to a Palestinian who is at his own home, and they walk up to him with assault rifles and start threatening him, start saying that they're going to take his house, they're going to take his land, he needs to get out of here, they're going to kill him. And as a result, the man who it is his property grabs the rifle and tries to defend himself from these group of settlers. And in retaliation, the settlers shoot and kill him. This was all recorded. It was all posted. And then afterward, the IDF comes in and I don't know if they said they handled the situation or whatever, but basically they ended up arresting the Palestinians and kicking them out of their house. And then they went through that entire village and just massacred the entire village and arrested, I think it was something like 60 people. They killed something like 12 people, shot a bunch of people. That's what they do in the West Bank. They create these flimsy and basically ridiculous examples and reasons as to why they can justify their barbarism and their violence and their murder, and then they take over the Palestinians' homes. In simplest terms, they're basically doing what we did to the Native Americans. The West Bank is what we did to the Native Americans, basically to a T, except they have better propaganda, they have better weapons, better technology, and the backing of the American empire, which is the strongest empire in the history of the world. And so what's happening to the people in the West Bank is awful, and I suspect that it will only continue to get worse. And obviously they're going to try and one day turn it into another Gaza, because at the end of the day, Israel's plan is constant growth and constant expansion, because they are a fascist state, they are a colonial state, and they are a genuinely small state as far as land mass goes in the Middle East, although they are incredibly powerful with the backing of the American military and technology and money. They are small and they don't have that much population. And like I was saying earlier, one of those reasons for the lack of population that they want to expand settler growth is because of their citizenship status. So something that a lot of people don't know about Israel is that citizenship in Israel is not technically Israeli citizenship. It is Jewish citizenship. And what this means is if you're born in Israel, that does not make you an Israeli citizen. What makes you an Israeli citizen is being born a Jew. So anyone across the world, if you're born in Brooklyn or you're born in Omaha or you're born in South Africa, who cares? If you are born Jewish, you are born an Israeli citizen. And that should be pretty blatantly and openly telling you that this is a religious ethno-state. The state of Israel exists only as a religious ethno-state, and that is the crux of when people try and conflate Judaism and Zionism. What you need to understand about Zionism is it is the ideology that created and backs this ethno-state, this religious ethno-state that can only operate as a state for Jews, by Jews, with no one else, or if it does have anyone else, it can't be a significant minority or, God forbid, a majority, which is why you see the Nakba in 1948, which is where they expel hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. And this was to balance the Jewish population in Israel to establish the state, because they believe that they have to have a majority Jewish state, and it also has to be a significant majority Jewish state so that there can be no other racial group that has any power in the state. And so when you hear things like Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East or other garbage like that, think to yourself, a democracy for who? Because this is an apartheid state where Palestinians, Arabs, non-Jews don't have rights. They can't even become citizens for the most part, and anyone who is a Jew can become a citizen. Imagine if America, we said, oh, if you're white and a Christian and you're born in Uganda, you can become an American citizen. But if you're born in Omaha and you're black and Muslim, you can't become an American citizen. That is basically how Israeli citizenship works. It's openly and honestly racist, and it is openly and honestly hateful to everyone who is a non-Jew, and especially the Arab people and Palestinians, obviously, whom they like to conflate all Arabs with Palestinians, which is just not true, but the Palestinians are Arab peoples. And as well, it is very important to understand that all Arabs are not the same, and also everyone in the Middle East is not an Arab. The Iranians are not Arabs. The Iranians are Persian, and the Saudi Arabians are Arab, and they are one of the greatest allies in the Middle East to America and Israel at this point. And so when Israel talks about hating Arabs, they're not really talking about hating Saudi Arabia, which maybe they do hate them on a racial basis, but sociopolitically, they're very appreciative of some Arabs. but they like to conflate all Arabs with one another to frame themselves as this kind of attacked nation. They're just a small little bean. They're the size of New Jersey, and they need to be protected from all these other countries that just want to kick them out. But what you have to sit down and realize is there is 100 years of history here, and that history all started with Israeli violence, Jewish settler violence in Palestine. And I really don't care if it's your biblical homeland or whatever the hell you want to say. First off, I think that's kind of stupid. I think it's just dumb. I mean, if my grandpa lived somewhere and then he died or whatever, or moved or anything like that, 100 years later, I can't come in and just kick people out of their house because my grandpa used to live there, and then exacerbate that, like extrapolate that dynamic to thousands of years ago. That's just not how the world works. That's just not how anything works, and nobody really thinks it works that way, because you know what? Every single other book of the people that live there that isn't Jewish or the Bible, those books also say that they have a tie to the land. So it's all just kind of stupid. This isn't how anything works. And at the end of the day, this is not really a religious issue. This really comes down to ethno-supremacy and fascism and things like that, and colonialism. And they like to throw a guise of religion over top of it. And I think that's something that as leftists we need to really avoid, because obviously there is a religious component and there is religious context that needs to be understood, but we don't need to get trapped in this idea that it's Jews versus Muslims or Christians versus Muslims or whatever, because that's really not what this is. I mean, look at how many surrounding nations are Muslim and how little they help the Palestinians. Like Jordan, historically, Jordan has actually subjugated the Palestinians. Jordan has made back deals with Israel in the 1967 war, for example. So this whole Arab or Muslim, whatever, that is not the most important thing in this conflict. The most important thing here is the colonialism aspect, because they were a British colony, British Mandate Palestine, where they moved the Jews in. And by the way, they moved a ton of Jewish settlers, and the Zionist movement actually started way before World War II and the Holocaust. It actually started before World War I. The original Zionist movement started in the 1800s. And then I believe the British Zionists, like the British Empire moving Zionist into Israel, that happened a lot more in the 19-teens and the 1920s. And so then the Holocaust happens, obviously, like a decade after that. So the whole idea that we had to create Israel as a response to the Holocaust is that's just revisionist history. That's just not actually what happened. And if we want to be very, very real about it, you can go back and look at quotes from many, many of the founding Zionists who started the state of Israel, who actually talked down upon European and Eastern European Jews who were killed in the Holocaust, or even the ones who survived the Holocaust, because they saw them as weaker, they saw them as lesser because they were genocided, because they were subjected to horrifying conditions. The Jews in Israel actually thought that they were lesser and they didn't want them to be a part of their colony. So that should just tell you how stupid that narrative is. But also, the Romani people had about 1 million people slaughtered in the Holocaust. Where's their state? Where's the Romani state? Where do they get to subjugate, millions of people who are slightly different ethnic group than them to, torture, death, and genocide? No, I don't think so. And this is just something that we hold up for this country in particular. But that's an important part of this that, as leftists especially, I want you to recognize is Israel's not special. That we need to remove that from our brain. Israel is an example of colonialism, neocolonialism, and imperialism. It's just like 100 years late, but it's not really any different than any of those other colonial struggles. Go look at India, which those are different, obviously, because Palestine, Israel is a settler colonial state, and India was an extraction colonial state. But look at the conditions there in India. Look at America as a settler colonial state and what we did to the Native Americans. Israel is essentially just a Jewish ethno-state version of America 150 years later, 150 years late behind us in the Middle East. That's really the difference. It's an unsinkable aircraft carrier. And it's really nothing different than the rest of the colonial events in history. And the Jewish component is just the newest flavor of fascism that they have added on top of that. And I do think it's very important, especially as leftists, that we need to recognize the difference between Judaism and Zionism. Not all Jews are Zionists, and so don't automatically assume because someone is a Jew that they're a Zionist. But there are a lot of Zionists, and Zionism is inherently evil. But that is something that the Israeli state wants you to believe. They want you to conflate Zionism with Judaism because when you say things that are anti-Zionist, they want people to conflate that with anti-Judaism. They want to call you an anti-Semite. So don't give in to them. But I will say we do have a little bit too much of a focus on the whole anti-Semitism aspect of it because there is no institutional suppression there, oppression. But it is important, but we need to have a hierarchy of importance here and recognize that the number one thing we should all be worrying about in this conflict is the life and health and well-being of the Gazan people and the West Bank Palestinian people, all people of Palestine. And I'm not going to talk about it that much in this episode in particular because I've already talked quite a lot for quite a while. But Lebanon is very important too. And I wish the best for the Lebanese people out there. If you are from Lebanon or you know anyone from Lebanon, shout out to them. I hope they're doing well, especially in southern Lebanon, which is the worst right now. Israel is pretty clearly doing to southern Lebanon what they've done to Gaza. It's a little bit different of a situation there, obviously with Hezbollah actually being a force of deterrence against the Israeli people. And obviously, Israel has no claim to the land there, but they are actively occupying it and calling it an act of war or whatever yellow, red line they call it. Basically, they have invaded Lebanon as a background to the Iran war because they can, and they don't need to justify it because fuck it, America will cover for us, and even if the American media doesn't cover for us, the American government's still going to keep sending us our money, so who cares? So during the Iran conflict, they go in, they bomb the shit out of southern Lebanon, they move troops in. I think they wanted to get a lot further than they did, and there was actually a ton of resistance from Hezbollah. And so they actually get not as far in as they want, but they get in quite far into southern Lebanon, destroy everything there, and now they've set up shop, and they're not leaving, even though they quote-unquote have a ceasefire that they have violated thousands of times already. And so they're doing here what they're doing to Gaza, basically. It's probably going to get worse. And so that's what you need to realize when it comes to Israel is it's not just Gaza, it's not just Palestine, it's not just Lebanon. It's the greater Israel project that they talk about. Their goal is constant expansion. It's never going to be enough for them. And really at the end of the day, you can just see it as an outgrowth of American imperialism. You know, we're not necessarily allowed to do some of the things we used to do, even though, you know, we kind of still do. But, you know, we can do some of it vicariously through Israel. And then when Israel does something bad, we can claim, you know, oh, we didn't have anything to do with it. Or, oh, we shook our finger really hard at them. Or you can be like Joe Biden and his advisors or Kamala Harris and say, oh, well, you know, I have some regrets about what happened. Or I feel really bad for the Palestinian people. Fuck those regrets. Fuck you're sorry, you know? We as the left, we as an organized people, we really need to stand up for Gaza. We need to stand up for Palestine. Don't forget about it. And what I really want the most from this episode, the most from you guys, is just to go out and do your own research on Palestine, do your own research on Gaza and southern Lebanon. Go out there, research it, research the history, find good sources, find good influencers, and spread the word. Don't let these people die in vain. Don't let them die in front of our faces in silence, because that silence is complicity, and I don't want you guys to ever be complicit. I want us to fight back. I want us to stand up, actually speak truth to power, and be the resistance, resist the fascist powers in the world that come down upon us, and just realize that none of us are free until all of us are free. Free Palestine, free Gaza, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Thank you very, very much. See ya.